Ja, tak jak w tamtym roku, chciałam Państwu przybliżyć troszkę, jak wygląda ten ekspozymetr i powiedzieć o nowym modelu.
I'd like to say a few words about a new model of this exposure model, what the citizens say and how we performed measurements in schools and also in recreational areas. Now, the colleague has already said it. We use RMS 5200, which is not only the value which we then verify in cooperation with the Voivodeship, the regional environmental service. This is a value that is not a basis for legal activities. So this is a guideline. It gives you information what's going on, but it's not legally binding, sort of. So what is important to us and for Krakowians is spectral analysis. So whether this is a base station or a mobile device, so uplink and downlink signal is measured. This type of exposure meter has been on the market for 16 years. One of the companies that use this exposure meter is Orange, the operator, and the exposure meter was invented by former Orange employees, and it is quite popular in France, used in the local authorities across France. We are the first first city in Krakow, and we are being followed by this town of Ciechocinek. We have our model type is the type 200, but there is another one, the evolution model. And if a gmina or a commune municipality is thinking about buying one of these, I'd like to recommend the new model. The price is the same, but it allows you to set the spectrum. So, for example, we won't see 5G because our bands are limited to 20 bands, while in the new model we can set the bands, and we are only limited by the up to 8 gigahertz. That's the threshold. So 8 is the limit.
An important point to mention here is the measurement is related to the citizen's address. And so Krakow is the only city with this expanded map, with those arrows that become rather famous. This is illustrating the notifications that we get within the environmental department in the city council, namely the operators declare how much of radiation is used at a given area, and then we add them together, and this is just part of our city with individual locations of base stations. Now, let me remind you, because this is pretty important, that Krakow citizens understand that this is just for information purposes only. This is not information that can be used for legal purposes. However, this gives us a lot of room for follow-up procedure. If there is 50% of the radiation exposure noted down in the citizen, then this is automatically notified to the Voivodeship Regional Environmental Protection Authority. If the limit is exceeded, then of course automatically this is also notified, and then the citizen would get a report showing them 24 hours monitoring of the values, whether the limits were exceeded or not, whether the reading was at any point in time higher than 7 volts, whether the average level of Krakow was exceeded as well or not, because the citizens have the right to know whether they are in the mid-range, what's the average for the entire city. This is the data we get from the regional authorities, and well, the limit is set by the regional authorities and it changes every year. Let me give you two extreme readings. This is one address, one location in two rooms, in the kitchen and in the living room. As you can see, the values are pretty high. So just to show you the difference between the radiation generated by the citizen and the radiation generated by the base station. This was notified to the environmental protection authorities and verification activities were performed because this was pretty high value inside the building. And then an interesting example, here you can see the values from the mobile devices of the user, of the citizen. As you can see, this user is using a lot of mobile data. There is wireless Wi-Fi of 2G. So this user is a person who himself or herself exposes themselves to the risk. What is the comparison between the exposure coming from the user's devices and from the base station? I mean, this is the graph that is generated, and the citizen, the client, would also get this data from us. This is the higher bar is the radiation caused by the base station. The green bar is the user's smartphone, and then Wi-Fi device also producing certain radiation. Let me show you the location, because it all boils down to the address, of course. So this blue spot shows you the address. This is the citizen's address. Most unfortunate, because we have the cumulative effect of two base stations, adding to high radiation way above the median line, the half of the limit. Now, if you look at the mobile devices of the citizen, it's 0.2 volts per square meter, which is about 12% of the entire radiation. So 12% of the entire exposure is caused by the mobile devices of the user. Another example. Here we have a citizen who uses a lot of devices. There is a mobile phone, there is Wi-Fi as well, the blue ones. Pink is the mobile data, telephone conversations, and here are the base stations, well, at very low level really, because radiation is at a low level. But now, let me show you the graph presenting the citizen himself. As you can see, the difference is not that big. Now let me show you the location of this particular citizen. Oh, before I do that, this is the graphic. High value Wi-Fi, pretty high value from a radio station. Now, this guy is rather lucky because he lives within a certain distance from two base stations, so the average levels are pretty low, 0.037. with a pretty even distribution across the entire apartment, and 73% of radiation was actually generated by the citizen himself or herself. So again, I'd like to urge the Institute of Labor Medicine, maybe we can come up with a certain compromise whereby we can optimize the location of those base stations, because some Krakowian population is rather unlucky being exposed to the cumulative effect, while others are pretty lucky not to have those stations nearby. If we start by educational activities, let's not overuse the wireless devices, let's go back to the cable-based internet, only use the mobile data when we need to be mobile, and if this is then top up with the optimization of the base station locations, not only the distance but also the power, the capacity and the height, so as to provide connection but not to allow for the cumulative effect of the radiation, maybe then we can go down to lower levels, and I'm looking at Professor Zmyślony. But of course this would require cooperation by many entities. However, these measures show you that there is hope and perhaps there is some future direction. Here are the measurements and readings taken out of schools. This is a school where the base station is located on the roof, and there's another one just opposite the school. Here there is a ground floor room. So this is the difference between the first floor and ground floor. Let's see whether the students themselves or teachers themselves generate a lot of exposure, well, a lot of radiation. Of course, there is Wi-Fi in the school. The children had to mute their phones. They didn't have to switch them off completely. Now, let's have a look at the proportion triggered by this exposure. Here, we have most unfortunate location. There are two base stations on the roof of the school, and the third one is located just opposite the school. So the average level is 0.55. There is a significant difference between the ground floor and the first floor. The first floor 0.7, less on the ground floor. Now, was it not for the third base station, and was it, I mean, if the school was located on a hill, for instance, then on the ground floor we would have much smaller radiation. So this is most unfortunate location. But anyway, mobile devices of the school contributed only in 2.5% of the entire exposure. Most of the radiation comes from the base stations. In Poland, there is no ban to put the base stations in the neighborhood or the nearest vicinity of the schools, unfortunately. Very often the operators would place their base station on the school, and they can blackmail the teachers and headmasters, saying that they would only move it to the opposite building, so basically the same exposure and less coverage. So, similar topic, namely a school with 3 classrooms, one on the first floor and one on the ground floor. On the ground floor, there is definitely a Wi-Fi router nearby because the average values are pretty high. Base stations are mostly contributing here. You can see link signal and Wi-Fi generating a lot of radiation, and then a lot of mobile phone users as well. Here we can see that Wi-Fi is the top contributor of the radiation. Here, this is the school with very thick walls. This is an old building, so the outside radiation is not penetrating that easily. The average level on individual floors are pretty similar, with the average level of 0.2 volts per meter, and the mobile devices, and mainly Wi-Fi, generated some 81% of the total exposure. So this is just a decision of the school authorities, or perhaps teachers or parents, whether not to use the fiber optics rather than Wi-Fi. And so, very brief conclusions, because we have been to the 3rd year of our school awareness raising campaign. Well, thanks to the fact that we do now have the spectrum analysis, we were able to do away with the myth that there is no radiation directly below the base station. Of course not. Those base stations are located on very low raised masts, and so very often they are radiating radiation immediately on the school, and very often we would have a situation whereby there's one station on the school and the other just in the closest vicinity, say on the opposite building. So this is the most difficult situation ever. Now, the Wi-Fi networks of the schools, of course, generate certain radiation, but it's definitely and significantly smaller than if it's still supported by the base station. Now, there is this official procedure in Krakow. If the headmaster is not able to adopt individual decision, they would have to have an appropriate consent from the parents and from the local population. If such a consent is granted, then the headmaster may agree for the base station to be mounted on the school. And just to conclude, two more examples. Well, for the first time, we measured exposure in some recreational locations. That's why we decided to measure Krakow Planty, which is this green belt around the market square. I'm talking to our foreign speakers. This is what you walked yesterday. And then Gołkowice Spa in the mountains, showing you great values exactly where you need to go to recover. Okay, this is what happens when you walk through the Planty, this green belt. This is close to the city authorities, which I'm very glad to see, the smallest amount. And then depending on where you walked and depending on where the measures were taken, well, the situation went from better to worse. There was a number of tourists in this green belt, so there was heavy traffic. These are the values generated by mobile phone users or mobile devices users. So you can see this is mobile data, of course phone conversations and so on. And then this is this green belt, Planty. This is this bun with plenty of stations. In the greenbelt themselves, of course, the green and the trees are really damping the effect. We may want to measure it in winter when there is no more leaves on the trees. So basically, the average level during the walk was about 0.3. Now, mobile devices of the local population would generate about 16% of the entire exposure. And then this Gołkowice Spa, as you can see, well, you can't even see the base stations, of course. There is a lot of movement by mobile phones with small coverage. Our mobile phone radiates a lot, so this is all the attempts to get better coverage. So these are high values from mobile phones in Gołkowice Spa. As you can see, these values from base stations are really neglectable. They are far away from the center, from the spa, and mobile phone users are contributing the most to the exposure. Now, the average level within the Gołkowice Spa is 0.028, and this is the center itself, the spa itself. Why don't you spend a weekend there? So basically, it's up to local population. If we are self-disciplined and if we want to put our mind at rest and switch off the mobile phone, this is contributing to lowering the average exposure, and there is hope for recovery. Thank you very much. This ends my presentation, and I hope to see you again.